My name is Daryl Boness, and I'm editor-in-chief of Marine Mammal Science, and I welcome everyone to the Editors Select Seminar Series. Today we have Dr. Anders Galatius. I didn't get that very well, but Anders won't punish me for that. Anders is a senior researcher in the Department of Eco-Science at Aarhus University. He received his Master's of Science and PhD from the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And he's been working at Aarhus University since 2010, where he works on marine mammal morphology, ecology, and behavior. He's currently leading the Danish seal monitoring program for harbor seals and gray seals, and he's been doing that since 2013. And on that note, he'll be presenting today on the use of unmanned aerial vehicles in conducting harbor seal surveys used in estimating pup production. As are all presentations, they're based on papers published in Marine Mammal Science. The paper this presentation is based on is called Phenology of Harbor Seal Pupping and the Influence of Weather and Pup Counts, investigated by unmanned aerial vehicles. On that, I think I will turn it over. But before I do, let me just remind people that if you have questions, you should put them in the Q&A rather than in the chat. Also, we are videotaping the presentation, and that will be available on the Society website in a matter of a few days. And the paper in Marine Mammal Science is an open access paper, so it's available to all. If you haven't seen it, you can go and download it. Okay, so apparently there's a problem with going on Facebook Live. So with that, let me just go ahead and turn it over to Anders to start his presentation.
Thank you, and I hope I am online now. Yes. So, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. This was really, as Daryl mentioned, I'm running the monitoring programs for harbor seals and gray seals, and this study is really an adjunct to the monitoring of the harbor seals. Because in recent years, or well, in the last 10 years or so, we've also been tasked to estimate the pup production, or at least have an index of pup production in harbor seals. And so far, we've not had a real investigation of formal investigation of the timing of the pupping, and we want to hit around the peak of the pupping season, more specifically at the time of the year when most pups are on land to do our pup surveys. So this was really a study that aimed to establish that phenology for harbor seals. And I am far from alone in doing this. This was the master's project of Samantha Seganfredo, our Italian student who worked with us, and my other sort of senior co-authors are Jonas Teilman and Floris van Beest, and yeah, we're all from the same department, all worked at the same department at that time. Here we go. Just for a brief introduction of the harbor seal, it's a moderately sized true seals, and true seals are those seals that are not sea lions or fur seals, both of which also have outer ears as a sort of one of the defining features. And well, they're also not walruses, which is the third group of the seal taxon. and it has a very wide distribution. It's found in subtropical waters like in western Mexico, and all the way up to Arctic waters like in Svalbard. And every year, if we get into what we're looking at, every year most mature females have one pup each year, but that of course varies, and supposedly also might vary with at least seen in some, has been documented in some seal species, that the fecundity and production of the pup production of the females might vary with resources, which also makes it an indicator of the resources available to the seals in some of the EU descriptors that we use to that we sort of design our environmental surveys around. And important to this presentation is that the harbour seals, most of the true seals, have fluffy, cute pups, and the harbour seals are maybe cute, but pups they are not, but they're not fluffy. They don't have this white fluffy coat that's shed in the uterus before the young seals are born. So they are born with the adult fur, and they are practically able to swim right from birth, and they also go out and do so, which makes it a lot trickier to count harbour seal pups than counting seal pups from other species. And also, as other true seals, they and other seals in general, they have a distinct pupping season at which during which the females rather synchronously have their pups. So lots of pups at the popping hole outs during the season. The monitoring of seals in Denmark are counted from small high-wing airplanes, where we can take photographs from an opening window, and we take overlapping pictures, photos of groups of seals, and go home and count them. And as I said before, there is no formal investigation of the timing of the popping season of the harbour seal. But based on informal information of different sorts, we assumed a mid-June peak in the number of pups. And also, as I mentioned, there is variation in timing within harbour seals. There is on both sides of North America, there is a quite pronounced latitudinal trend in which pup in the more southerly areas, females have their pups early in the year, and then it gets progressively later the further you go north. And also in places where there have been investigations, there is also a temporal trend, and this is a graph from a study in the Netherlands, where they analyzed all their survey data from back from 1975 and up to 2010. And during that period, they estimated that the popping had moved around 30 days earlier, progressively during that period. So even if we have our investigation now, this is something that we should redo every now and then. And then, of course, another source of variation would be interannual fluctuation. It's also been seen in seal species that differences in climate and weather may impact the timing of popping. The study site for this investigation was the Limfjord in Denmark, and it's a shallow inlet in northern Denmark, and there are narrow connections to Kattegat in the east and the North Sea in the west, but it's only been open to the North Sea since a big flood in 1825. And in the inner fjord, at least, there is a resident and distinct harbour seal population that's not closely related to the harbour seals in either the North Sea or Kattegat. So we suppose that these are seals that were in the fjord before 1825, when the flood opened the fjord to the North Sea. And this brings us to a short medieval interlude, because we also know that historical sources say that the Western Inlet was closed by 1200 AD, but it must have been open in the year 1085 because our then king, Canute the Holy, assembled a fleet here to invade England, and that would not make sense unless he went out the western end to go to England and have that invasion, as Danes did every now and then back in the day. This was the last planned invasion, and unfortunately it got foiled by the Holy Roman Emperor being troublesome to our south, or we might have had this seminar in Danish. So the seals in the fjord are likely descendants of the seals that were or may have come from the North Sea back in the Viking ages. So these are what we call our original Viking seals. And the population in the area, should also just be mentioned, is not doing too well. We have these are our data from our counts during the molting season, which go back to 1989. And until 2002, the seals have been heavily hunted in Denmark. So the population, all the populations of seals have been heavily decimated. But up until 2002, the seals were growing at a population was growing at a steady pace. But in 2002, we had a PDV, porcine distemper virus outbreak in the Eastern Atlantic that killed in some areas up to half the seals, and it also hit the Limfjord heavily. And it seems also, and we know that there's a lot of oxygen depletion in the fjord since the 2000s, and that seems to have hindered the population from regaining its former abundance. So back to the POP surveys. The distribution of POPs in the Limfjord, we had conducted one survey during the popping season when we started the planning of this project, and that was in 2016. And at that time, we kind of focused or honed in on the Limfjord for this project because we found all the POPs on just two holdouts called Blinderbund and Ejerslev. And you can the data from the 2016 surveys are, well, the far left column, and about half the POPs in the Limfjord was on one holdout and the other half was on the other holdout. And well, during the project, we've conducted further aerial surveys, and while there is large variance in the number of POPs, we have always had almost all the POPs counted on these two holdouts, which is extremely convenient as they are situated just 7 kilometers from one another in the fjord. And well, the other holdouts in the fjord are marked with black dots here. And this, we thought, made it ideal to do our first drone service. And I was just warning you and wanting you to remember that this large variance in the POP counts for later. Because the variance is a bit of a problem, because what we want to do is to see if there are any trends in the numbers of seals and in the numbers of POPs over the years, and the variance, of course, decreases our ability to detect trends, and we need a lot more data, a lot more years, and a lot more observations in each year to be able to detect a trend when we have large variances. So we try to minimize variance in our surveys by conducting surveys within some constraints, that is around low tide, plus minus 2 hours. Where applicable, it's not applicable in the inner Limfjord because there are barely any tides there. And also under no precipitation, 6 hours before the surveys at wind speeds below 10 meters per second. And around midday. And all of these, the time of day, the wind speeds and weather variables and tide are things that are known to affect haul-out rate of seals. So we try to keep these things as stable as possible. And of course, we also want the date relative to the molting or popping season is also of paramount importance. So we try to keep that as close as possible. And all these molting surveys that I presented under the assumption that we had or the popping surveys, that we had our peak in the number of pops ashore around mid-June. All of these surveys here between 2016 and 2023 were conducted between the 13th and the 17th of June under the constraints of these weather and time parameters. We also wanted to go at the times where weather allowed it. So these holdouts, these two holdouts, where all the pops of the population are born, and it seems that all the adult harbour seals go to breed every year, are Ejerslev 1, which is a small islet with some vegetation, and Blinderon is around, Ejerslev 1 here is around 500 meters long and 300 meters wide. And Blinderon is a long sand or pebble bank that is somewhere between, well, up to 1 kilometer long, and it's prone to flooding because although there are no tides, when we have strong westerly winds, a lot of water is driven into the fjord from the North Sea, and then Blinderon gets flooded. So we having this sort of convenient area for drone surveys, we decided to do a study with drones where we could cover these two holdouts several times in consecutive breeding seasons. And actually, we started with a sort of large, ambitious fixed-wing drone that we could deploy from land, but we ran into several technical issues. So then we went out and did the really dirt cheap option of getting this is a DJI Phantom off-the-shelf consumer product that anybody with a modest budget can go out and buy, and we deployed it from a boat. And there was very little disturbance of the seals, and once we sort of adjusted our flight altitude, there was no visible disturbance at all. It was limited by strong winds and precipitation, which basically meant that we flew within the same constraints as the aerial surveys that we did this investigation for, so this was not too bad. You're not recommended to fly this drone above 10 meters per second of wind, the same as the constraint for our surveys, and also not in rainy weather, which we also don't do for the surveys. And we had 3 field seasons in 2017, 18 and 19. So we ended up completing 20 surveys of both holdouts at altitudes of 30 to 35 meters where the seals showed no disturbance. And during these surveys, we took overlapping photos of the holdouts, same as we would do during a regular aerial surveys. And we got weather variables from the same hour that the surveys were conducted from a nearby weather station, 13 kilometers from one holdout and 18 kilometers from the other. And also we aimed to fly around noon to again mimic the aerial survey, so we didn't have too much variation in survey time. And the holdout pops, which are sort of thinner and limber and more limp than adult seals, and also generally smaller, although 1-year-old harbour seals can be very similar in size to the pops, were counted manually. We went on to analyze it, and based on the way the data behaved, we opted to use general additive mixed models and had the number of pops as our response variable in our models. And we weren't too interested in differences between years. We wanted sort of an overall aggregate estimate of timing, and also our data were far from sufficient to look into differences between years and the holdouts. And we know a large amount of the difference between the holdouts is decided by the water levels, because it seems that the seals migrate from one hole out to the other, from, well, Blinderand, which is flooded, to Ejderslev when the water level is high. When the water level is low, a lot of the pups and mothers seem to prefer Blinderand, the other hole out. And then as our explanatory, the year and the hole out were then used as nested random effects. And then the explanatory variables were the date, the hour after midnight, the time of day. We had some variation in that, and also weather variables like wind speed, wind direction, and the temperature. And then we just simply used the backwards stepwise selection of our explanatory variables until we only had significant variables left. And this resulted in we have date and wind speed in the final model. And we've done similar exercises on other hole out data, seal hole out data, and we were actually very pleased with having 67% of deviance explained and an R-squared value of 0.6. And the relationship with date looks like this. Also, again, there's quite a lot of variance in this, and this is obviously again related to the fact that harbour seal pups go swimming. We see them swimming with their moms quite a bit, and also we see sometimes moms swimming with single moms swimming with several pups, so they seem to be taking care of the pups of other females. And because harbour seal females also go need to feed during the lactation period, so they every now and then they leave their pups there. But yeah, pups also go swimming, and this accounts for this, means that there's quite a lot of variance in the counts again. But based on observations, pups are beginning to appear in the area in the latter half of May. Our first survey was on the 5th of June, and our last survey date was on the 3rd of June. And our model estimates a peak around the June 22nd, which is a tad later than we expected, with a mid-June peak. And then the other variable that turned out significant was the wind speed. And lots of weather variables have been shown in other studies to affect haul-out behavior of harbour seals. But both waves and wind speed, and those two are in a closed system like the Limfjord, when we only have locally wind-generated waves, are highly interdependent, and that was why we didn't have waves in the model. But they've previously been associated with lower haul-out attendance, especially in the pupping season. That is, higher wind speed is associated with lower haul-out attendance. And that also kind of makes sense, because inexperienced and small pups might be somewhat vulnerable to rough sea conditions. And even if it is a small enclosed area, we do have occasionally quite high wind speeds up there, and the sea can also get pretty rough. And also worth noticing is that the estimated effect here is large, even if our observations were only done at wind speeds between 1 and 6 meters per second. But even within that small interval, we had an estimated 75% more pups on land at 6 meters per second than we did at 1 meter per second. And again, no significant effect from the other weather parameters, but although other studies have shown that thermoregulatory constraints might be pretty important for haul-out rate of harbour seals. But then in this area, temperatures rarely go into the extreme, so that might be expected. And as for the other variables, time of day, we didn't have a large variation in the data, and that was part of the study design, so that's not very surprising and doesn't really allow us to say if there was any any sort of diel variation, which is seen in lots of other studies of seal haul-out behavior. And then we can do some slight, we do have some slight basis for validation of the data, in that we have these aerial surveys, and only one of them, the 2018 survey, if I remember correctly, was done on the same date as one of the drone surveys. So we tried using our model to correct these survey data where we had this large and annoyingly large variance, and adjusting the overall pop count by our output model, we get corrected counts like these, and this is actually reduces the variance in our counts of by 59%, which is a lot, and maybe surprisingly much. So we'll need to. It's only, of course, it's only 7 years of monitoring data that we have to work with here, but we'll keep an eye on this in the future and see if this pattern holds up. Because if it does, then, as I mentioned, we only all these surveys are conducted within a 5-day period in June. So what really affects these the correction of these data by the model is the wind speed. And even if we only fly at wind speeds below 10 meters per second, and we also, for this exercise, we took the liberty of extrapolating the same trend that we saw up to 6 meters per second, up to the 10 meters per second, where at which one of our surveys was conducted. So, in conclusion, well, drones were a very useful tool for this study, and we had a estimated peak in numbers of pops ashore was somewhat later than expected, but it's yeah, not an important difference. But wind is important, it seems, both in the model and also the validation seems to give some more credit to this, and should be considered, and something we will consider in the planning of surveys. It's difficult to conduct the surveys within this rather narrow window that we want to, without having some leeway in terms of wind speed. But we'll definitely keep an eye out to see if there is the survey data also keep reflecting this impact of wind. So something to have in mind, and yeah, a model validated as far as we could with independent data points. So we should thank, and oh, here we go. We had 2 further participants in the fieldwork, Julie Ejstrup and Jesper Abel, and the Danish Environmental Protection Agency funded our work. And that is sort of the presentation part. Thanks a lot for attending.
Anders, thank you very much for that presentation. I see we do have one question in the queue already, so I will turn it over to Aisha to handle questions. So let's go ahead, Aisha, and start with what's there. See if we get any more.
Yes, great talk, Anders. Very interesting. The first question we have, and the only one so far, so I encourage all the other attendees who have questions to pop them into the Q&A box. How do you document disturbance? Do you count head alerts as disturbance, or just if they flush?
No, those we didn't get flushing during this, so it was we started flying at 45 meters altitude, but we also wanted to get optimal photographic quality to be able to positively identify the pups. And then we progressively flew at 5 meters lower until we saw the seals starting to raise their heads. And then we went 5 meters back up again. And that ended up with our 35-meter altitude at one hole out and a 30-meter altitude on the other hole out. So yeah, disturbance from the drone was just the alertness and raising of heads of some of the seals.
Thank you. We have no more questions for now, but I have a question, if that's okay, for the students that might be watching us. What would you suggest to aspiring pinniped specialists of the future? How would you recommend them to proceed with this? And maybe some undergraduate students or master's level or even PhD level. Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I think it all depends a bit on where you are, because if you're looking for a project, then you should get in touch with a researcher, of course. And if you have, and if I get a student writing me, which happens, then I very much appreciate if students have given some thought to what they want to do and have are acquainted with the topics that they're interested in, so they sort of start a conversation with me around some aspect that they'd like to investigate, rather than just sort of blankly writing me and saying, I want to work with seals, do you have a project for me? So to me, I sort of that demonstrating that you have been interested and dug a bit into this topic that you want to work with goes a long way to also make me more interested in working with a student, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it really helps to say what specifically you're interested in, even if that project is not available or not even possible.
Yeah. Then I may have other ideas, or maybe they. But sometimes we can also sort of think about if you're interested in diet and have read up a bit, and you've noticed that there are no diet studies from this area, and there are troubles with fisheries, or or suggesting a project like this. This project was something, and that also happens, this specific project was something that we wanted to do and advertised for students. And then Julia, who assisted in the field work, and Samantha, they applied among several other students, and we took those two on board.
Thank you very much. And in the meantime, we have 3 questions. Well, more than 3 questions, but from 3 people. Well, first one is from Moni Visser. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. The question is, were you able to count pups in the water approximately close to hole out? We noticed that they quite enjoy being out in windier questions close to shore with their moms playing.
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's also what we see in the surveys. But we opted not to count pups in the water for this survey, because we don't do it during our aerial surveys, because the visibility below the surface and our ability to count water, we suspect that it's strongly weather dependent. We might have glare, we might have waves, or even some white caps in the area when we've got wind speeds approaching those 10 meters per second where we fly. So to keep things constant and have clear definitions of what we're working with, we opted only to count those seals that were on land and not in the vicinity of the hole outs, which is tempting to do.
Thank you. On to the next question. It's from Claire Steinfield. Claire's asking, what was the limitation on the drone survey? Was battery life and distance an issue? Were bird populations a problem?
Well, as to battery life, we did have a backup battery, but my memory fails me right now as to the extent to which we made use of that. But given the precaution of a spare battery, it was not a problem with the and we didn't experience any problems with birds. I don't know if did that cover everything.
Were there any other limitations with the drone? You mentioned the wind speeds.
Yeah, because ideally we would have liked to have more, or we had planned for more surveys than 20, and maybe we had also planned to wrap up the project before we got to 3 field seasons, but we didn't think we had enough data after 2 field seasons, so we had to go for a 3rd field season. So that's part, and it is a windy area, so it was very conducive to the drone approach in terms of us only basically being able to cover all the pops in within a 7 kilometer within a small area, but it is also a windy area, which put limitations on the work.
Okay, thank you. And next question is from an anonymous attendee. First of all, thank you very much. It was a good presentation. I have a few questions. How did they come up with or determine the altitude of the drone? They started with 45. Why specifically 45? That's the first question, and then there's 2 more.
Oh, and I'm not, forgive me, but I'm not actually entirely sure if we started at 45 or 50 or something like that. But it was within. We had some indications from flying drones over seals before, and we have definitely also scared seals with drones before. And then we also had talks with other people, and then there was just the simple basic necessity of getting within a certain distance to get sufficient quality on the photos. And I think it was we couldn't have reliably counted the seals with the quality of the camera on board if we had flown at higher altitudes than 50 meters. So we needed to sort of have a make or break moment early on in the project to see if it was possible to fly within a reasonable distance of the seals.
Okay, thank you. On to the second question. If I understood correctly, during the study, there were no flushes at all. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's how I remember. I wasn't on site for most of the. No, actually, because our Samantha wrote that, and she was there for. She was there for the surveys, and she wrote that in the paper, and there was no disturbance. So there was no disturbance.
Okay, and the last question from this participant. You mentioned that other moms taking care of other pups. How did you determine this, and how often did you record this? Actually,
we have a follow-up paper using the observations from the survey. This is something that I see when I fly, that I sometimes see a mom swimming with more than 1 pup. But also during the surveys, we saw during the pupping season, there was a sort of progressive tendency to sort of kindergartens of seal pups being seemingly under the care of a single adult seals, and those groups grew larger and larger as the pupping season progressed. And there's also recently been evidence from other studies, and forgive me, authors of other studies, I don't remember your names right now, of alloparental suckling. That means that is a mom that, or a female seal that's not the mom of a pup suckling a pup. So there is evidence of other female harbour seals taking care of pups that are not their own. And this is also something that we see, and we've got a data set on this progression of in the size and amount of harbour seal kindergartens also in prep.
That sounds really exciting. We have one question from Patrick Kegerer. He's asking, what improvements or upgrades you think would be interesting for drones to get in the light of this project? Or do you think the available material is already good enough?
We would like to, and we also have now drones of a higher quality, and something that could definitely be improved is if we had sufficient photographic quality to individually identify the seals. That would also give well, lend a new dimension to the study of, for example, alloparental care, which we would not really be able to document without identifying the individual seals.
Thank you very much. For now, we have no more questions.
All
well,
right,
thanks a lot. Really good questions and things that I missed covering during the presentation. So thanks a lot for those.
So Anders, just quickly, so you know, I actually have published quite some years ago on fostering behavior in alloparental care in harbor seals and also in Hawaiian monk seals. But in harbor seals on Sable Island, we saw often when, especially with storms, where high surfs sort of drove pups and moms into the water, and females would go off on feeding trips. If they came back and their pup wasn't where they left it, they would start searching for it, calling, and if pups were any pup that was sort of aggressive in trying to suckle from the mom persisted, that usually the female would give in and nurse. Whether or not they actually long-term changed pups, I don't recall, but there may have been some of that. Certainly there was some of that in Hawaiian monk seals, where a female would either nurse multiple pups throughout lactation or actually switch pups, probably through confusion.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there is also, I'm not aware of evidence of this in harbor seals, but in gray seals, there is evidence that the same females tend to have their pups next to each other, which could be if they build long-term relationships, these females, that could be something that facilitates alloparental care and the kindergarten behavior. But I'm not aware of any evidence of this, something like this in harbor seals.
So I do see some other questions come in, so maybe we still have time. I think we're what?
I can maybe turn on some light because night is falling in Denmark.
Yeah, go for it. So we have 3 more questions. The first one is from Paul Emus. He's asking, what do you think of using drones for herding away from oil spills or using drones for rescue?
I'm not sure that I have any thoughts on that, because I'm not at all acquainted with those things.
Okay, and then we have a kindergarten question from Moni Visser. Moni is asking, how old do you think those pups are, the ones in the kindergarten?
How they are what?
How old?
How old?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose that it's difficult to tell the age of a harbour seal pup, but it is something that occurs as the breeding season progresses. So my best estimate is that the mom, and maybe Daryl can also weigh in on this, but that the mom stays with her own pup a lot during the first week of nursing it, and then leaves it progressively more to go to sea. And this is also the time where it would make sense for kindergartens to form, of course, when the mom needs to be away to forage. And
Yeah,
I should also mention that it's the harbour seal lactation period is generally thought to be something within sort of 20 to 25 days. So it's comparatively long for a faucet seals, which also sort of both allows and requires the female to go forage. It's not as intense as you see in species like harp seals and hooded seals, species that breed on ice.
Yeah, I was just going to confirm, I think, what you said about early in lactation, females spend more time, I believe, with their pups than later in that regard. So I think it is likely that those kindergarten pups are of females that are later in lactation, but I don't remember for sure.
Thank you. Next question is, did you set up automatic routes for each site, or did you fly manually? If automatic routes, how did you determine different parameters like overlap?
They were flown manually, the drones. And they were just enough shots were taken that they overlapped. It was never a problem.
Great, thank you. No more questions.
Okay, we've run out of questions again. And let me just ask you one question before I think we can call it you've had enough time answering questions, but can you just elaborate for me a little bit more about the use? If I understood you correctly, you were using the aerial survey data to correct counts from the unmanned vehicle. Could you just elaborate on that if I understood it correctly?
No, I must have yeah, I must have been a bit confusing that. We used the model derived from the drone. So the model that we built that included actually only dates and of course, the wind speed as explanatory, and we used those to correct the aerial survey data from that we had between 2016 and 2022 to see what they would do to the variance of those the interannual variance of those counts, as sort of the best method of validation that we could think of.
Okay, yes. I think now it's my mistake because I looked at the first histogram and
it wasn't in the paper. Sorry, and it wasn't in the paper, that part. So this was something that I thought of doing for this presentation.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I think we've had enough of your time answering questions. I appreciate the answers, and a very interesting talk on a subject that is dear to my heart. Many years ago, working on these species as well. So appreciate you being willing to give a presentation based on your paper with colleagues, and thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Great. Well, we'll see everyone hopefully next month. I'm not sure if we have a presentation lined up. Maybe Aisha, you know the answer to that better than I, but If not, stay tuned for an announcement on the Society of Marine Mammalogy website.